Speed has created a precedent for liberal democracy, constant eruption of absolute futurity to the present, desecrated the need to have forward of the liberals and needs to sustain itself democracy, has sold its soul, handing over authority to a unitary executive to maintain coherent political identities, now leads to a seems to be global, ever more complex political technological apparatus and safe uncertainty. The absent non-unitary conception of subjectivity is one that embraces a rift in time. The rift in time, the way that it constitutes democratic space for deliberation, creates a condition of possibility for interconnection with non-human abiotic others. The alternative shifts the perspective, but not the cartography, which means they can never solve, and the app is a precondition to developing the forms of life and the forms of non-life that they can live in harmony. Bernardi and the non-unitary subject of the George's radical ethics transformation running against the contemporary neoliberal conservatism. The sustainable ethics of non-unitary subject proposes a large sense of interconnection between self and others, including the non-human others, by removing the obstacles, self-centered individuals, and nomadic eco-philosophy from multiple lines, consciously redefined according to not as the core of humanism, as the best way of synchronizing the multiple differences with each and every one. The shift to a biocentered egalitarian composite subject of post-identity side is an embodied unbounded identity, which exists within the interaction of numerous external forces, not all of them human, social or historical others. Before we make the shift, mistake the shift in scale for a qualitative shift in perspective, we need to develop more accurate cartographies to answer these challenges. The specific temporality of nomadic subjectivity needs to be accounted for. I think that this is actually evidence for us because it says that we have to account for temporality within our notions of anthropocentric. We have to account for the idea that the subject has been descended from any sort of human agency to a fundamentally non-human one. Things like cyber robots. We're not saying that they're always bad. We're saying just like some people are bad, some robots are bad, which is what we are criticizing. Our argument is not an argument against all technology, which I think is pretty clear from the way that our 1AC is framed and the way we read our economy evidence. However, an understanding of technology and technicity is distinct from either life or either life or the cosmos is important to understand the conditions of possibility for the axiom that atoms and three. The territorial is the most important. Is the very basis for animal social bodies to control. For this for this reason, further arguments for great ecology to complement green ecology, the most important ecological structures within a common denominator. They've all been organized around the problems of starting with the terrestrial body of the earth. There's a worldly basis for animal bodies that drives this argument that is the way widespread ignorance with this great dimension that is given environment that moves the quaint folks the aspect that makes them appear so ridiculous. Ecology is not a question of human-machine dialogue with the collective practices of communication. The generalized axiom is appropriate to the great quality of absolute speed that will finally replace the local axiom. The past the ecological zone, the only term by a local axiom, the invention of extraterrestrial, circumterrestrial technology, the true global axiom of great quality explains the global population are being increasingly plugged into the vital infrastructure of singular networks. The disaster zone, our biological machinery is not adapted. Our eyes can't see radiation, our noses can't smell it, our hands can't touch it. The environment produces accidents as part of its regular function. No impact. The universe is too big to destroy it. As an example of abiotic life, billions of galaxies with trillions of stars mean there's an infinite number of gas giants, asteroids, stars, other planets that will remain pristine. The entire point is that they have no basis for evaluating whether things are good or bad. There's no axiology without some sort of ontology. There's no value. There's no ethics without some sort of presupposition of subjectivity, which means they re-entrench the exact same kind of thing that we were talking about. I think when we ask in cross-sex, how do you decide what's good and what's bad? They just say because it is, that is the will to authoritarian that we talk about. That there's something behind all of this which determines value once and for all, whatever that may be. That is the historical excuse not only for a will to authoritarianism, but the destruction of the environment, the destruction of the very conditions of possibility for this planet being in existence at all, which I think is a net impact turn at the level of framework that saying biotic life has value is not the same thing as saying that abiotic life does not have value. Just because we seek to preserve a particularly unique and complex formation of molecules, molecules does not mean that we say that all other forms of molecules are bad, which means that if we preserve a specific form of complexity or a specific form of arrangement of amino acids, that's probably uniquely valuable anyway. However, ontology, the prerequisite of value, you can't affirm something being good. There's no way of determining axiology without axiology, which is key to determine whether or not you should vote A for neg without a conception of consciousness or life or biotics in the first place. Young kids for environments that erroneously assign human values to amoral materials where they attribute human values to it, which are completely irrelevant. Nature is incapable of being concerned with the extinction of any particular species. Over 99% of all species are parasitic because non-human factors of humans value biodiversity because it reflects the natural world where the beauty of nature can only exist in the mind of the rational value, or people have the capacity to create value with non-human existence. Human beings are at the level of nature, known universe, a distinct natural phenomena as are their rocks, and their place in nature needs to be reorganized. Unlike the plants, humans have a conceptual faculty because morality involves the ability to choose the faults of the world. This is related to human choice, but rationality uses conceptual facility to create values and values. They say we romanticize nature by creating a stable object of being that they can control. They do precisely the same thing. Their nuclear holocaust card says we should live in harmony with nature. Why is that true? Why is nature harmonious? It isn't harmonious, which is our point. About the constitutive break within all of these. They're the ones that create a telos beyond any of our abilities to perceive, because they assert an axiology without actually creating one, which means the only value by which you can cast your ballot is the one that is, yes, ultimately arbitrary, but one decided by the complexity and uniqueness of human life. There's no distinction between natural and unnatural. There's no reason to prefer the negative presumption flips that for. And problematic connection is that nature is only nature. It's a sustainable entity produced within chaos. Natural, the extinction of dinosaurs was not unnatural. We produce what is natural. Our interference is natural. There is no way humans can leave believe that which is natural extinction and unsustainable event is a question of good or bad is an ethical question. The alternative ignores the unique epistemology of living. Now the firm challenges humanism and anthropocentrism without abandoning the project of knowledge entirely. Schwartz and Wiggins intend if all of reality can be explained by science, all of reality can also be explained by the terms of the most basic constituents of science and uncover, namely inorganic matter. Jonas has shown that there's another way to interpret the incorporate to the whole human back into scientific theory. We must now account for everything living and non-living. Within a unified system, we should be able to draw on everything we know about living and non-living in our account of reality. This should include this should include everything we encounter. This should include everything we encounter of the living and non-living in our own direct experience here. We can claim privileged access because we are living beings ourselves and we know what it means to be alive from our own first-hand experience. Every moment of our waking life, we directly experience life. Life is in ourselves and others. This constant experience of our own being alive makes it possible to make sense of the being alive of other people and to extend of animals. Hence, we should be able to start from both sides, from the side of what empirical science can tell us about inorganic and organic reality, and the side of our own direct experience of life and the other. I show how the two means to form a living being and understanding fully appreciates the biological processes and organisms, the inward felt experience of being alive. Hence, any other intersection, we shall reason from both directions. I market directions. And their critique is obsessed with the politics of purity that creates fascism, also makes it impossible to instantiate a broader critique within the public sphere or within any sort of thing that would change anything. Spotlight on iron 5 prejudice of energy within animal rights, thinking political implications that are unbelievably elitist require aversion from people to abandon sustainable livelihoods. These are not matters of taste, but to survive before taking such practices would be tantamount to eliminating societies. These overlapping between animal liberation politics, xenophobic authoritarianism, and prominent role in the history of fascist theories. Theorists surprising themselves on rejection of anthropocentrism. What helps account for this is a preoccupation with purity. The presumption is the true virtue that requires repudiating unclean practice can easily slide through distorted vision, ideological purity, regressive dreams of one is going to carry emancipatory potential, their political ramifications, range from trite to dangerous to simplistic critique of speciesism yields the same rancid anti-humanism that is always turned radical, both on the reactionary opposite. Other thing. Of course, we could be wrong. That's a reason to vote out. Only we create the conditions possibility for structuring deliberation in a fashion that allows the middle of doubt and all, which means we're preconditioned to this alternative and the other one because we're the only ones that sort of spill up or create any sort of larger change within the political, which is necessary to instantiate the ideology that either of their arguments talk about. However, this is an impact turn to their other position because it says that humans are ultimately the creators of knowledge and value, which is their King evidence and their Johnson evidence, which I think demonstrates that they have fundamental inconsistency with the one thing that we're pointing out, which means this is ultimately irreduced when you should probably vote out on some sort of permutation. This framework is ultimately reductive. Their arguments about performativity don't make any sense. The performance of the one AC was a distinct communicative intervention as explained by our Connolly evidence into the existing process of deliberation, i.e. debate, in ways that we think are positive. They haven't contested these, which means that I think that is important. They point out inconsistencies. What are these inconsistencies? They say we have impacts versus some everyday boring politics. This is our everyday boring politics. The engagement in deliberative spaces like this one is how we constitute our political subjectivity. That's our Sherman and our Gleasos evidence, which is a reason why we access all these things. However, permutation confronting problems is necessary to prevent total undecidability and takes responsibility for the act regardless of the objectivity of ethics published. 5. That grammar critique can be seen as welcoming and countered with other ways to be critique does not yield completely to the infinite. To do so, no doubt, would be to code against people avoids their death. Calculation informing welcoming counters and providing concrete for naming current ourselves and enunciating promises of what sort of life may be possible. Negotiated around this form involve finite calculations, always incalculable, indeterminable, and open-ended promises. The critique's mastery is not narrowly bound to images that founded legislation. It works against the grain of the must and the necessary recognizing the expansion of experience that works on finite terms by naming the threshold and welcoming other ways of being. We have to investigate extinction. Our presentation of these impacts is uniquely important because there is no authentic being toward extinction, which also impacts terms. There are other K. Kennedy 7. The phenomenon of extinction is technological or stands for death. Our being toward extinction has to be authentic because it includes a moral being in the world with others. Not like death. Extinction cannot summon authentic individuals to the possibility of the lack of us is a defining feature of extinction. We fail to be humans as long as we project a hostile indifference to the possibility of perpetuity. The ontologically inconsistent phenomenon of extinction undermines its own being. We assurance that there will be a future where we take on the burden of mastering past the phenomenon of human extinction. Cyber is death, current being in the world with others. Extinction saturates our existence, never stops happening.
Why was it necessary to kind of tie your discussion of speed and politics to this kind of like apocalyptic imagery that there's a piece of evidence?
Well, I'll say that predetermines that we have conscious decision-making powers, which we think impact turns here. Because you said we got to decide.
Okay.
So, obviously, it was just matter that caused us to do that, because you can't say it's a bad thing.
I'm asking about the second.
No, that's our.
I mean, that's kind of part of our answer is that they're internally contradictory positions. That's an inconsistency in your position vis-a-vis.
Or it's not.
Yeah. So my question is, why did the 1AC make the decision to read this piece of evidence?
It's a collection of amino acids combined to form DNA that form.
Okay. You've read the piece of evidence.
Which is good, you said, so we should go with that. We should roll with it.
Okay,
Aminos
that's
are great.
fine. I have another question. That's interesting.
Okay.
You've read a piece of OR evidence which shows that presumption should switch out. This evidence says that kind of extinction is natural and that we should not interfere within it. Why isn't the act an instance of it attempting to interfere with the natural extinction of a species?
We don't attempt to interfere with anything. Everything is natural, including our interference.
The plan attempts to resolve kind of the extinction that you say is coming because of nuclear.
We do think humans will probably be extinct at some point. We think people will also die at some point.
What's the impact of the act?
Insofar as you admit the possibility for valuing anything, we think that humans should be valued, life should be valued, the possibility of the existence of the earth should be valued.
Yes, but I guess my question is, why did
You've
presumption
also
shift?
made the claim on the Antro page that ontology comes first because humans are the top of nature.
Nope.
Yeah, so do you want me to read the line of your comment?
Yeah. Oh, actually, no, it does say that. Oops. Oh, that's pretty bad.
There we go.
No, it's not. We're going to defend that
Oh
humans
my
are the.
You literally just said
We're going to
that.
defend that humans are the foundation of ontological
Why are we
thought.
bound to things that we said?
You're the ones enforcing this weird inconsistency on us. Or consistency, I guess.
Alright, the piece of
I don't know.
Havlich evidence that you've read, I guess why is that responsive to the K? Why is that a defense of kind of your use of like extinction rhetoric? This evidence just says, or I guess, never mind, I have a different question. Why is authoritarianism bad? Why is democracy good? Just even in broad terms, even in terms of like decision making.
It turns things into sameness. We think things should be different.
Okay, how does democracy facilitate that?
Because democracy is a celebration of difference, at least the way we sort of structure it.
How? How does the app kind of resolve the way that democracy kind of happens in the status quo in a way that celebrates difference?
That we sort of forwarded in both 1AC and 2AC, and I don't know if you really respond to, insofar as we embrace the possibility of subjectivity without the necessity of the unitary subject, the sort of becoming other that's important.
So it's the necessity of kind of creating a type of subjectivity that's important?
No, not creating subjectivity,
what
but
you just
recognizing that
said.
subjectivity is always already split.
Yeah.
The affirmative divides existence into two categories: the valuable stuff that must be affirmed and the dangerous stuff that must be tamed by a human liberal democratic will. In particular, they identify robot technologies as dangerous, other threatening our psyches, our relationships to people, and perhaps or even our very existence. But existence does not fear the cyber warfare. It has no pity for the human who cower before them. Their demand to tame cyber operations reflects an all too human hostility to non-human others that must be rejected. You should instead embrace the status quo. Valuing existence does not mean dividing up reality based on our likes and dislikes, but rather surrender to what comes, even if that means cyber weapons technology is the next stage in evolution. The role of humanity is neither shape nor destroy dangerous technology. If we have a commitment to the overcoming the species' divisions between valuable and valueless nature, then we must respect the wildness of nuclear technology and cyber technology that is fundamentally not about us. Specifically, we must accept that this new technology threatens the end of our current biological order, the age of mammals. Accepting this truth is key to overcoming anthropocentrism. That's the second piece of McClellan evidence. The alternative is a prerequisite to the affirmative ethic, because species of devalues our existence. Freedom will not be possible unless we end the domination of non-human life. Best no date. MLK for a leader vision of world house, all people around the globe live in harmony. King's world house, so it's still a dream. It's still a damn slaughterhouse because the human is a challenge of killing billions of animals and humanness. Real hope always remains in the light until the human extends equality to the animal, movement, the pros of fundamental evolutionary challenge to the human beings. Can we recognize the animal question, the circle of the crisis of relation to one another, the natural and animal rights of the soul, the human species identity and special compass. A species that may call to the question of the map, so whereby the human defines the very world. We urge qualitatively in the moral consideration. We insist that the species boundaries are ours, are arbitrary. Those who race, sex, humanity to have a future of human beings. Let's embrace the universal ethic that respects all life. We can change, we must. The message of nature is evolve or die. And extend the first piece of McClellan 93. Evidence explain the overview. The overcoming species bias requires giving dignity to all of existence. A full-fledged rejection. A species that requires us to respect technology humans use to view nature as dangerous and therefore need to control. We now love quote-unquote nature, but the same hostility has been transferred to dangerous technology like computer codes and war games. To overcome anthropocentrism, we must ethically reject the otherization of technological equalities, even if they threaten our existence. They cannot permute. We embrace the status quo, which means you can't, which means any solvent perm would sever their challenge of the status quo. Bad perms are bad subs because they move the substantive question of the critique. And also in the second piece of McClellan, we must surrender our existence. Mean they can't. Any change that makes the status quo isn't an affirmation of reality, and therefore reflects a hostility towards non-human existence. We're winning at first link. First, the 1AC explicitly described totalitarian robots as being something that is uniquely damaging. Although it was really cute what happened in the cross-examination of the 2AC, they cannot spike out of these lists in the way in which the 1AC describes and to try to avert this type of accident. Second, there's some problematic language then within their Hutchings evidence that indicates that our lives will be like a terminal machine with open doors and open close, a labyrinth for laboratory animals. Moreover, indicates that in this new chronos there's a lack of fit between the human time and speech and the action and the time of real politics. Proves that they demarcate a distinction between the human and the non-human, the subject and the non-subject. Also extend a piece of Grove evidence, the 1AC identification of a unitarian executive as anthropocentric and inaccurate depiction of the operation of military power that fetishizes the moment of decision or lack thereof made by elites. There's two impacts to this. First of all, they do not get their advantage. Berlioz notion of the accident misunderstands the materiality of weapon system. It's not a coherent machine, but literally millions of people, objects, and different temporal rhythms. Beast of point, it turns the case reification of the sovereign image of military power prevents a network of understanding warfare because the war machine will continue to flow. They say that that's our argument, but look at the first argument that was made in the 2AC on the anthropocentrism flow, an explicit focus on the liberal democracy, which is devolved to a unitary executive. We say this is not true, that there's not a unitary executive that is in control of the questions of cyber warfare. The status quo. Fourth, the 1AC describes speed as an eruption of time that's evident. The Gleanos evidence is contradictory with the thesis of the affirmative, which assumes that there's something special about this technological moment. This evidence makes it clear that our perception of speed emerges from our delusions about time. It makes it clear that all eruptions of moments of time are questions of speed. The alternative of non-dual ecology accesses this in a different avenue by breaking down the dualistic subject. It creates a different relationship to eventalization, to the emergence of events, because there's a conception of movement from past, present, future that's contained within the affirmative diagram that non-dual ecological orientation undoes. This existence is not true, yet they maintain the dualism by constructing technology as separate. They say that that's not us, but look at what the 1AC does, not what they say they do. And fit their Connolly evidence is a link. The Connolly evidence describes the need to come to terms with an accelerated pace of life to foster democratic rule and chasten fundamentalist drives. They claim they don't slow the world down, but instead prevent greater speed. But this is a distinction without a difference. It still partitions the world into subjects that can prevent any most speed and objects that we stop speeding up. And moreover, their Gleanos evidence indicates ontology of speed is at the heart of this, but their Hutchings evidence indicates that we are in an era of electromagnetic proximity. Although the 2AC might claim that they don't have any new form of the world of cross-examination, the 1AC was pretty clear that they articulated we are in a distinct epoch, one in which this type of electrons is shaping the way in which decision-making occurs. But our argument is that instead this is a natural evolutionary process. And also deliberative democracy's negative offense, breaking down the artificial divide between human and our things is a prerequisite to biodemocracy. Bennett 10. Agency distributed upon multiple sites from recording electron and members of Congress, not so much a doer agent behind the deed of black up undoing of the human, non-human, assemblage, liberated, often unknown, characterized the human center agency, human will is divided against itself, including non-humans and demos of prevention of future blackouts per se will depend upon the host cooperative efforts undone, unjust and concede the human is the ultimate wellspring of agency, cars, electricity, transit system, the acts of matching the role of other things besides the carrier of necessity or vehicles for human ingenuity. My speech depends upon the electricity, my laptop, the locus of political responsibility, human, non-human, the civil, human actors themselves, trafficking, confederation of tools, micros, and girls, has the ethical responsibility, the individual resides on one's response to the subculture which one's participating agency is best understood as a model of criticizing the writing by a bicycle. One can throw down one's weight and deflect the bike and one trajectory motion, but the rise one acts and then the whole moving whole. And death and danger are inherent part of existence, and their hostility to dangerous technology reflects a human-centered bias. McClellan 93, reality is as perfect today as it ever been. It must be enjoyed as a pollution, warfare, famine, and poverty. Ecosystems are always in perfect balance, even when they are going exceeds time. Ecology must be respect for creative, destructive working processes. Only one thing that can be happen, not some things that are good, others that are bad. Includes fragrant urban ecosystem and includes the urban industrial mega green ghettos and pavement zones, the extinction of wild animal species, life and death, everything we love and die, everything we hate will live, everything with it, and we will never be rid of such problems. What's happening is evolution. The thing is not to reject subject of things dangerous and poisonous, even the heartless receives and nuclear bombs. Next thing they read a Bray Doty evidence. The affirmative has no internal link to this evidence. There's no argument that endorses a non-unitary subject within the 1AC, and instead all of the link arguments that I made above actually proves why they merely are a reclamation of this type of unitary subject. They read a great ecology argument, but my response is similar. The 1AC still is to try to avert this accident. They have no internal link to forms of great ecology that their evidence describes. They say authorization, but we say they say abiotics is not the basis for good or bad, and ethics has to be created by us. But this argument is fallacious. It converts the substantive question to content and trivial forms of the form. Snowword 96, that any value possessed by nature is based upon human perceptual relation, trivial substantive distance, content and trivial since all ethics are equally considered because they are conceived as human beings. However, the substance is the wide variety of conceptual responsibility. Our diversion is equivalent to saying the advocacy of wide affirmative action is sexist racist because the advocate by a appeal to the trivial since argument is insufficient grounds for refuting this argument. And they say ontology first, however, their Youngkin's evidence says it's because humans are on the top of nature. This turns their ability to affirm any type of ontology of openness. This magnifies all the link debate that I made above, but also it's a reason why they turn case, because they cannot have this type of ontology of openness, which is what their blanket attempt to try to permute all the critiques is, because they are making definitive ontological claims about the way in which nature is structured in forms of hierarchy. They say presumption flips app, but however, the alternative is literally the status quo. This means presumption must vote negative. If the 2AR goes for these nihilism arguments, and it's the reason why you might as well vote affirmative, that is going to be pretty embarrassing, because obviously if existence has no meaning and instead they're affirming a type of nihilistic form, there's no reason why we should have a rethinking of ontology that the affirmative describes. Also, they say epistemology Schwartz across by the abundant evidence that proves why our conception of matter is good and it should be valued above. They say purity test, but this Stoudemire evidence assumes animal rights. Also extend to seed evidence. We are part of the earth and therefore speciesism is an artificial construct that fails to recognize our interconnection of existence, and extend the Western evidence. Even if there are differences, the standards are arbitrary. Humans naturally privilege human qualities. If we were chipmunks, we would say the ability to store nuts in our cheeks is the criteria for moral worth. We must extend moral worth to non-human existence. The boundaries of the moral frontier must expand beyond humans, animals, to life, to earth, and the universe as a whole. They cannot access this because the ontology argument I made above naturally did not. Broadly also include nature, ethics should expand for the preoccupation with humans considered animals, plants, rocks, and even nature in general for a long period of time. Broadly was an admired self-interest. Some people would push the circle to ethical relevancy, other words, geographical distance eventually ceased to be a barrier in time that people began to shake free nationalism, racism, sexism, the abolition of American slavery made important also both species and persistent animal rights. The next logical station, moral extinction, Leopold for holistic biostream morality. There have been calls for the liberation of nature, the rights of plants, and even defense of rights of solutions in the whole boundary of what limited liberals of the human freedom are breaking down. The majority still regard it as incredible historians, or whether the same incredulity met with the first proposal grading pitch the American colonists, freeing the slaves, respecting Indian rights, and integrating schools. Every great movement must experience a three-stage ridicule, discussion, and adoption. The nature of intrinsic value consequently possess the right to exist and equal to that of humans, antipose anthropocentrism.
A lot of your evidence indicates the need to deconstruct the dualizing notion of the subject. If the negative is just a vote for the status quo, how do you do that?
We embrace the nuclear.
No, I thought it was just the status quo because we have nothing to permute, right?
No, I was answering your
Okay.
question. We embrace the nuclear holocaust that your evidence
Is that the
describes.
status quo?
You have made the claim across this YC that this is
No, I'm
happening
just saying,
right
for the
now.
purposes of competition and various other things, you're like, no, we're just the quo. But then you're like, we should actually affirmatively embrace this. We should change our relationship to both non-human nature and not nature.
Yes, it's like an ethical orientation
orientation, I suppose.
Okay,
that
so
the
you are
affirmative-
introducing something.
The affirmative very
That's all
much,
I'm
the
asking.
affirmative, I mean, I don't think that that's necessarily true because the
Okay.
status quo still happens.
What's the distinction between affirming a particular ethical orientation and affirming the status quo?
Well, I guess like the status quo has an ethics that the affirmative foregoes.
You're saying right now the status quo, like, what do you mean the status quo has an ethics? Like,
Well, like
who or
there's an
what the
ethical
status quo has an ethics?
orientation. I mean, it's like the alternative is that there's something ethical about the status quo. The affirmative tries to
Okay.
get rid of it.
Cool. What is ethical about the status quo?
That it sort of allows us to understand our relationship with the broader cosmos.
Why is that good?
Why is that good? Because I mean, do you want me to go through all the impact claims?
Well, you had a lot of internal link claims. I don't think you had that many.
Yeah, like we read evidence in the 1 and C and 2 and C that indicates that the foundation of hierarchies is the notion of anthropocentrism.
Why are
and also
hierarchies
the,
necessarily bad?
why are hierarchies necessarily
I'm just
bad?
wondering.
I mean, the foundation, I don't know, like,
Okay, that's reasonable. We don't know. Robots equal evil. Why is it important to affirm that technology and humans have literally no distinction? Why not affirm their distinction, say that technology can be good or bad for humans, we have a relationship toward technology?
I don't think that's what the affirmative does.
You don't
That's
think that the affirmative says we have a relationship toward technology?
The
It's not determined one way or the other.
1AC is an explicit attempt to try to avert the accident of all accidents.
Yeah, we
This
have a
is the
technology
Hutchings
that we've
evidence.
identified as
And your
negative for human
Connolly
life.
evidence indicates that we need to stop the speeding up of all these technologies.
No, that's actually the opposite of what our
No, it says not. No, it makes the distinction between we shouldn't slow it down, but we should stop the speeding up. That's a direct line from your evidence.
I just like don't even think that's true.
You can reread it.
Yeah. Okay. I guess I will. Let's see. You say your only sort of answer to our purity argument is that you're not animal rights liberation. You read Best. You read Nash. These are all animal rights liberation people. What is the no?
Yeah, I think that you should look to the seed evidence, which is not just an
What's the
affirming
seed
of
evidence?
liberal.
What function does it play in this debate?
The function is that it's not an extension of liberalism, the liberal notion of rights to animals. That's not what the alternative has been the
that's
whole
not really
debate.
what our politics of purity argument says, which is precisely the opposite, that the instantiation of an order in which anything that's sort of not agreeable must be eliminated is bad, which is the opposite.
I don't think that the alternative is this type of order that you're describing. It seems that the warrant for the evidence is
So is there an
predicated.
alternative now? What is the alternative?
The alternative is to embrace the status quo.
Okay. And yeah, alright, I guess I already asked that.
That's time.
What about?
Actually, can we take a second?
Sure. That was 6 seconds. I got it. Very good.
It'll just be internal critique.
I think we need to use
Is it computer, paper, what's the
It's on. Okay.
The 2AC is far too dismissive of this argument, especially because the vast majority of it is not responsive. This is not simply a K of judgment, but rather challenges the fundamental relationship between the AF's solvency mechanism and their impact calculus. There is no offensive reason why the inclusion of their impact is necessary to solve the AF. Means that we just have to win a small risk of a link that turns the AF in order to win the debate. They say that they are a precondition to challenge political conditions. This assumes that the alternative, this assumes a different alternative, but the alternative does not preclude political engagement. This will be explained more below. The fact that the 1AC double turns itself means that we do not need external impact because their explanation of the app changed radically throughout the debate. So some say this point needs to be reached. Additionally, if there is a contradiction, then they can concede it, which checks any TUEC abuse. Both critique challenge the 1EC's relationship to extinction proves that there is not a contradiction. They make the argument. They may group their next two arguments. I will do the link work here. Do the link work here first. Is their early evidence says that atomic warfare will result and wipe out everyone on Earth, as well as their hunching evidence says that a nuclear holocaust will result. Neither of these pieces of evidence are in the context of some sort of slow accumulation of violence or everyday violence. So the TUEC tries to spin it as, but rather the quick escalation of flashpoint. There are multiple ways that this impact calculus double turns the app. First, their urge to get to an apocalyptic impact embodies the type of speed that they criticize in terms of debate practice. The revolutionary possibilities of the app politics are foreclosed because they play into accelerated technique of debate that forces a grid of uniqueness linked extinction to shorthand a deeper analytical approach. They play into the political economy of policy debate, proves that there is no epistemological difference between them and a drone's good app. Second is that they shut down democratic deliberation because extinction limits the contours of discussion that can happen. Apocalypse predetermines the affective responses because it creates an environment of fear. The only outcome that is allowed to emerge is one that rushes to avert this catastrophe, like their advocacy of the Bush and Iraq proof. This example, WMDs were used to shut down any type of political debate. The speed of extinctions meant that even a minute possibility of WMDs mandated a mobilization of preemptive war despite widespread dissent. Third is the judge's sovereign decision, the deployment in the speech of images of the apocalypse and their attachment to call for action makes use of the imaginative faculty in such a way that apocalypse and judgment become linked. It makes use of the kind of anxiety that they say in the status quo is structured around, which is the imminence of the event and the imminent fear of death. In a covert way, they place the judges into the subject position of the authoritarian dominant executive figure in need of vast authority in order to make rapid decisions and anxiety about the structure of the decision and the decision itself. This is the way that sovereign decision making insidiously reasserts itself into spaces of deliberative democracy. This is also a reason why we solve the app better. The alt is a play with deliberative democracy that avoids their rigid structuring that adheres to formulaic debate practice. The alt deconstruction opens up space for affective interactions that exceed our expectations and is a prerequisite to their advocacy text, which calls for uncertainty and deliberation to occur. Only the alternative can achieve this type of radical embrace of uncertainty that opens up debate to futurity. This critique is also not a critique, the critique also says that their communicative intervention is bad. The links are a reason why their representation of apocalypse overshadow any part of the 1EC that might have value. They say that their impact is everyday. This is an ahistorical understanding of these arguments of the way that these images operate. Should afford the specificity of our arguments over his assertion. He has read a piece of Pavlich evidence. This evidence is not responsive nor descriptive of the process of the permutation. It just says that we should explore different political possibilities. But the examples from above prove that the way that they talk about extinction predetermines those political possibilities, and the way that they can occur in the first place. Also, bad crossplay, the bad terms are bad substance from the 2NC. We are less than the 1NC, so perm links or a severance. The permutation cannot overcome the link because not all inconsistencies are good, and the links prove that their performative contradiction undermines the 1EC. Second is security backwash. The permutation cannot take back the after effects of mastery because affect is sticky. Even if their particular decision is good, it spills over to future dogmas that undermine engagement that Shahani, Pavlich, and plausible risk cannot be taken back. Kessler in A versus 5 potential loss, even the highest probability of counter relevant loss goes to 58. The search names get possibility chain probable and simply collected with accepted Russian possibility connection. The Saddam Al-Qaeda was prevented and repeated this to not prevent the improbably possible connection. The next argument he made is that they investigate extinction. However, look at what they do and not what they say they do. A lot of the work is known about, but their metaphysical comfort produces after effects blocking our ability to respond to both ethical obligations and potential apocalypse. This argument is also defensive. We produce a better capacity to respond to contingency by exploring the gaps within the 1EC. Now there are a couple examples from map evidence to prove that they cannot shift out of those verses. There, Glazos advocacy card proves that we better control the internal links of the app because it says in the underlined part that not simply the pace of events but rather fear determines deliberation, which proves that they have to be responsible for their affective attachment as well as their Glazos evidence indicates that the liberal narrative or actually never mind. They also turn premise of Resentiment argument, his prediction of extinction imposes a direction and telos on the way that they think history will go. Now, this was clearly a pick, so they don't get new arguments in the 1AR, but we're not defending every kind of pick, just simply ones that emerge from the impact emerges internally from the 1AC, which proves that it is predictable. They don't trade off debating the affirmatively. They just have to have a good defense of the 1AC. Also, same picks are illegitimate double turns. The 1AC, they are trying to shut down critical inquiry by closing down questions that they do not want to think about. We also don't steal the 1AC. We create new emotional capacities.
This is very important.
Are you snapping?
Yeah, you are.
Ooh, Jackson.
We gotta accelerate that technology.
Is there any other better example of the morality?
Snapchat is the politics of speed. Okay, so the second argument, Lynn's speech, and then the first argument, Carl's speech. Or the speech of their amino acids. Alright, so everyone ready?
No. I don't. Oh.
Did you email something?
Yeah.
Oh, I just got it. Okay. Hold up. Let me open it. Man, technology's not as fast as we thought.
Well, sounds like some good impact defense. What if we just use the word for real good every time the technology fails to meet your expectations? But that's what should be. Alright, everyone ready? Okay. We don't double turn ourselves. The only argument that made in this flow is that we have a nuclear extinction impact. We also talk about regular people dying. Our point is that we have both of those impacts. So evidence indicates that there's both the possibility of small-scale impacts and large-scale systematic violence. There's also the possibility of grand-scale violence. Her arguments about the importance of our practicing deliberative politics indicates there's a value in the continuation of human existence. So once again, if we win any risk of our impacts, it's better than the status quo because we will win that destroys the deliberate possibilities at all. Now they say we might be wrong. Of course we could be wrong. We're preconditioned to this alternative and the other one. We're the only ones that spill up and create any larger changes necessary to instantiate the ideology that their evidence talks about. In impact turns their other position because their evidence based on contradiction that deliberative democracy is good because it maintains human interactions in politics, but it also is deliberative democracy is bad. Now irreducible because they're also engaging in inconsistency logic, which is a fundamental presumption question. Presumption flips our way in this argument, even if they're right, they're just defending the status quo. They also have these mindset shift arguments, which are reasons why they are moving away from the status quo. Negative flexibility doesn't answer the thesis that your argument was an imminent criticism, and you said it was important to indicate contradictions in position. We've indicated imminent contradictions in your position, which means that Suo's Adorno quality imminent criticism, the reason to vote half automatically enough feedback turn the political economy of policy debate doesn't was a meaningless term because nobody in this debate said the policy debate mattered or was good for anything. However, we do have indications of why our type of debate was uniquely important because it creates the deliberative conditions for us to engage with the politics speed. That's the Connolly and the Sherman evidence which we explained above. They say politics of fear, we're not motion Iraq. You might be right. That extinction won't happen. That was sort of our point the whole time. There's still a pretty hardy risk of danger and war, which their own evidence has said is bad because interventions are only bad if humans shouldn't die. Now the alternative doesn't solve the affirmative. The alternative is like an Alice in Wonderland of contradictions, which we should do the status quo, but also indicate a mindset shift totally away from the status quo. Doing the status quo is not a radical embrace of uncertainty or believes the Connolly that says the global political sphere has been shut down. The ability to engage in these politics being communicative intervention. The affirmative was good because it challenged the culture of the space. The negative, less George Bush walk all over the man. Apocalyptic imagery is good. This is our boy Joe Chapter 12. Hesitate to blame, which is the apocalypse out of risking evil, absolutely ignorance, how the metaphor was risking cooperative, not enemy, exclusive in action, they stick back to your rights and laws, fragmented institutions, and find the connect, let's give master step, to activate, get cooperative, and time, master about to make up powerful enough to try to deconstruct the outside. The risk of cooperation, which is played to demonstrate all they are all interconnected and operated to overutilized and guide the plan down the pick. It doesn't solve anything, even if it is legitimate or point that you need to engage in the performative politics of the one scene in order to challenge any of these things. The pick is literally the pick is just due to the status quo, which means it doesn't solve any of the reasons why the app is good enough. The affective sticky, I don't want any of that affective response. If they're right about affect, they can't explain or rhetorically rationally any of the reasons why you should vote affectively one way or the other, which demonstrates that affect isn't actually a real thing and shouldn't be the locus for decision making. Now trying to say humans might be an affective reason to vote affirmative because you can try to imagine a world where you and everyone else you know is dead. I think you might feel shitty. Next argument. Complex political apparatus is trying to see uncertainty, which causes acceleration, loss of control, shift towards the unitary executive can't respond fast enough to give up authority to decide for assembly, which causes cyber warfare, making possibility of integral action inevitably irreversibly disastrous. Much as evidence is our social uniqueness, nuclear war, and economic collapse are coming down. Desire for speed becomes a political talos that undercuts the possibility of regulation. Think derivatives, trading, market warfare. Look, the accident may happen, and also might not. If you vote for the status quo, you're not voting for a good thing. You might have an ethic, but embracing the status quo isn't enough because they need the mindset shift. Our deliberative conditions created by the affirmative are key to making that mindset shift spill outwards, which means we are important even to the alternative. Now, eco-authoritarians and dystopes concede they can say piece of sod virus and they're the politics of purity, which has to eliminate all individuals who do not fall into their politics. That it's also impacted by our belief systems. It's a resentment towards those individuals who refuse to engage in their nostalgic form of sort of pre-modern politics, which is our point. They lead to a sort of violence against those individuals. They are the only link that they have to the affirmative, some hippie guards that we don't think rocks have ethics. Here's the double blind, which the reason nobody goes for this argument. In fact, they think human actors like the negative need to intervene in order to stop other humans from making certain decisions. Demonstrates imminently, you might say, that what is right emerges from a specifically human relation and requires a certain form of agency. Otherwise, they would simply do nothing and want to die or become microbes or turn off the techno machine, whatever they'd like to define that as. Now, ontology comes before praxeology. Ontology, or the theory of what existence is, emerges from a reflection on reality. We find ourselves in neuropsych 101 as nobody knows how neurons determine our states of consciousness. Now, the young and organs evidence indicate both indicates that some reflection on our status inside the human world is somewhat unique to humans. They might be right. The mountains and rocks have consciousness too, but the problem is that we don't yet know how to talk to them or how to mind them, which is a unique reason why we should keep humans alive, because we need to mind them with mountains and tortoises. Now, even if they're right, the technobio is a thing that also has agency. It's kind of ridiculous to say that we didn't choose to build tech things if only because koalas, which I love, haven't built nukes yet. We should reject the otherization of technology because that presumes that one could even otherize technology in the first place. If technology is controlling us, they might want us to reject them because maybe the nukes don't want to be exploded because they like their new silo homes. Now, species system doesn't evaluate our existence out there. The one who say that all of us should go, so that doesn't make a lot of sense. Only the risk floats our way. Universal ethic that respects all life presupposes meanings about what life is or isn't, and what ethics are and aren't, which are concepts that are that their own evidence indicates are fundamentally human. Their evidence says ethics bad. He says ethics good. That doesn't make any sense. The link to it. He says language like laboratory animals have it really rough. So do laboratory humans. Our point is not to divide them. Make some sort of differentiation between these two things. We say that there are assemblages and those determined. There's no such thing as they find boundaries. What is human? What is not? They say materiality. Weapons we're going to concede. There are growth evidence which proves the cards about tech biology determining everything we do are totally wrong because it indicates that humans are part of the assemblage that has both agency and decision making over technology. This card takes out the rest of the criticism because Jairus basically agrees with the affirmative. He leads us with one of his Hopkins buddies. His speed is not automatically bad. The evidence isn't even impact defense. It's actually just a different way of understanding the nuclear impact that we read. They say that we have inconsistencies in our argument. I answered that above. They say he says the distant epoch argument. There's no total epoch shift. That was the cross examination. That's a human-centric category. We do things that are wild now, like talking about people, talking to people on Skype and doing things like watching a video from across the ocean. That's crazy technology shift deliberation. They're democracy. Just says that there are human and non-human assumptions that determine a lot of things. Same argument as the growth. Yeah, there's a precedent. There's also cyber response technology. That was the one I see the entire time. Which means we don't get rid of that differentiation. They read the Snoward evidence says we need to value matter. That's our argument. Rocks might be cool with that humans, but we can't really take that risk because we don't know that humans are always thrown into the world. You don't choose to be here, but you can make decisions about how you interact with that world, which is our penny evidence that says there's no authentic being towards extinct because you can't actually imagine the world without or being present because we're always present to the world. Now the permutation is incompetent. The permutation competition arguments are silly. They're not less than the affirmative. They include all things like mindset shift, which means they're not just doing the status quo. The permutation no dissets, only risk of being good. He'll say the permutation is bad, which is specific value judgment, the consideration of both alternatives or any reason why you should pick only one. The alternative and not the affirmative is indicative type of rationals, and they say we should be bad. No, they'll say it's only affect, yada yada. Affect is just their word for feelings, which means if you've got some happy feelings, you should affirm. Everyone also endorse the goal of the permutation. It's really combining the affirmative engagement with beauty and horror, with technology, with the alternative ecological mindset. We are not the ecological policy there have been criticized, which means that the mindset shift would become the ethical affirmative to which you engage with and analyze our politics, which would be good. It doesn't turn the case, and it's not the root cause of any things. If we went any of our agency questions, which is what their Shira's Grove evidence says, it's not the root cause because there's always assemblage connections which become determining, they engage with each other. Yeah.
Alright. Before I start prep, can I get all my athletics?
anthro, and then internal critique.
We all good.
Whatever. Anthro will concede the permutation not going for. They've already made a reason about why the internal critique argument is an impact turn to this argument, which means that the internal critique argument goes in the direction of the impact. They cannot claim any other offense. However, we will concede all their argument about the question of politics of purity and authoritarianism, which is their reason about why the other alternative cannot solve case if we prove on the internal critique page that the affirmative devolves into a new type of authoritarianism through their big sticky impact calculus, and you should vote negative because there's only a risk that they have shut off the deliberative model that the 1AC solvency is premised off of. Anthro. You are going to vote negative because Brad was too busy making Jarris Grove jokes to extend a permutation on the internal critique flow. They have not made any substantive picks, bad argument, just a defensive argument that we contradict ourselves as well, which means that if there is a risk that their type of contradiction is turned through, if their ability to have an ontological rethinking and a turn towards deliberation is shut off by their large big stick impact, then there's only a risk that you can vote negative. The only other response to argument is apocalyptic imagery, good, but there's Shat's evidence as a reason about why apocalyptic imagery is key to ecologies and stopping biopolitics. This is not a warrant for a reason why it leads to deliberation, which is what all the 1AR internal links are predicated off, which is the impact of the case turn argument. However, this does answer all the contradictions debate because it indicates that the master's tools can be used to dismantle the master's house. The specific quote is that the master's biopolitical tools can become powerful enough to deconstruct its house and despite risk of co-optation, which is why any tension between the two 1 and C positions is merely used to fight authoritarian impulses of the 1AC's impact calculus, but this does not lead to an impact in questions of deliberation. Now, we are winning. They have functionally conceded the entirety of the link debate. Their really evidence indicates that atomic warfare will result in wipe out everyone on Earth, and their Hutchins evidence indicates a nuclear holocaust will also result. Neither of these pieces of evidence are in the context of a slow accumulation of violent thing. Although Brad indicates the top one here that they talk about the mundane violence that individuals experience on the ground, however, they do not extend any example. I am not sure after the 2AC and the 1AR what types of violence that they are talking about, but this probably proves why they are crowding out these forms of violence in order to focus on the big stick impact calculus, which was the first argument that was made in the 1AR on the anther flow. There's a few reasons about why this type of impact calculus double turns of the affirmative. First of all, this urge to get an apocalyptic impact embodies the type of speed that they criticize in terms of debate practice. The revolutionary possibilities of politics are foreclosed because they play to an accelerated technique of debate that forces a grid of uniqueness, link extinction to shorthand and deeper analytical approach. This proves why they are not the type of bottom-up movement which 1AR indicates is disaster the alternative. Second of all, they shut down any form of deliberation because extinction limits the contours of discussion that can happen. Apocalypse predetermines the affective response because it creates an environment of fear. Bush and Iraq proved this. WMDs were used to shut down politics. He says that I don't want any affect, but however, extend the lead evidence and that it's not a question of affect, good or bad, but rather a question of affect is inevitable. It's only a question of how we orient ourselves. The affirmative reduces some type of openness of ontology to a large stick impact that is a rational impulse. However, instead, your decision calculus cannot be situated at the level of a rational decision maker, but instead an attunement to the way in which the emotional predisposition of their affective register makes it impossible for us to resolve what type of politics is good. Third is the judge's sovereign position. I do not think that they respond to this meta argument about your positionality as a judge. The deployment of a speech in the images of apocalypse and attachment to call for action makes the use of the imaginative faculty in ways that apocalypse and judgment becomes linked. It makes this kind of anxiety that they say the status quo is structured around, which is the imminence of an event and fear, imminent death in a covert way. They place it just in the subject position of a dominant executive figure in need of a vast authority to make rapid decisions. This is a reason why we saw the better. They've conceded that they have not made any coherent solvency destined to the pick whenever it is really just less than the extinction impacts, i.e. the Hutchins and Virilio evidence. The alternative is a play with deliberative democracy that avoids the rigid structure that adheres to formulaic debate practices. The method of internal critique is better. That's the Jones evidence because it ruptures the internal inconsistencies. They say this is a reason why the 1 and C positions contradicts, but however they concede the last one in our arguments that were made that it's not just contradictions outright that are bad, but rather contradictions within one position. We have made two independent positions in the 1 and C, but it is too late for the 2AR to make any new form of conditionality argument. Also, this critique never contradicted the Anthropocentrism because we tested desirability of their impact calculus at two levels. Anthro says they chose the wrong
starting point, and the grammar argument tests whether they should have a starting point. Our critique proves that 1AC contradicts itself. It requires us to run a dual track method to unravel the contradictions inherent in 1AC. Their argument about the reasons why we also have contradictions might imply if there was an external impact to this critique, but this is the distinction we're making between internal critique and versus external critique, because there's not an external impact to this. Rather, instead, it is the reason why they are not deliberative enough, and instead they shut down the ability to have a deliberation of ontology of speed, because no one should give a damn, because there's going to be a type of nuclear holocaust that's going to occur as a result. Also, we did not trade, and also they have made no fairness arguments about reasons why you should reject it. So even if they cross-apply some type of a permutation off of the anthropomorphic and the Jones evidence, and not all inconsistencies are good. The link proves that performative contradiction undermines the 1AC. They have also conceded the Shahani, Palich, and leaked evidence, which is the security backwash, disavow the permutation. They cannot take back the after effect of mastery because the affect is sticky. Even if their particular decision is good, it spills over to future dogmas that undermine engagement. The only way in order for us to determine whether a 1AC that is shifted through the 2AC and 1AR about whether or not they are nihilists or whether they actually believe in deliberation, which is the contradiction between the 2AC and 1AR that has occurred, is to test it internally. If you think that there's any risk that the affirmative has had a shift in position but yet has so relied on the trope of apocalypse in order to get out of it, then there's only a risk that you should vote negative. They say that they talk about people dying, but crossed by the affect is sticky argument. Even if there is some type of structural violence impact that is extended to 2AR, they cannot take back the security backwash because this emotional predisposition predetermines our ability to rationally evaluate these individuals that died. They say they say radical uncertainty, but the alternative is not a blanket embracement of uncertainty or nihilism, but rather instead is an attempt to test whether the affirmative has accessed the type of deliberative methodology that they claim is good. However, it's impossible for us to have this ontological rethink when it's attached to a big stick impact calculus. Yeah.
going to get them in a lot of trouble here. The constant eruption of absolute futurity of the present has desecrated the neat temporal order that liberalism needs to sustain itself, which inevitably leads to existence. We build ever more complex political, technological apparatuses to save off uncertainty. The Groves evidence indicates that this process is a gradual process of accretion between different humans, not a process of affect building, which I think is an important distinction that we will draw here. That I don't think they have really contested voting. AF represents an endorsement of our communicative intervention within a space of deliberation that exists, i.e., this one, in which we sort of act against the dominant modes of the will to authoritarianism that exists. I don't think they've contested any part of this space, so I don't have to explain it very much. However, it's important that this is an act. This is something that you endorse. It is something that you do rather than something that's simply a theoretical thing that you investigate. The performance and experiential and sort of phenomenological aspect of the 1AC is important to affirm independently, which means they don't solve. That was our only solvency arguments against the peg, and they dropped it, which means that they have no ability to access any of our arguments. This is a precondition for all of their alternative arguments, even if they win that affect is important, which I think that will beat them on. We're the only ones that structure a deliberative space in a particular way. They can't just say that they will endorse this mode of deliberation, because we are the only ones who actually performed it by introducing the 1AC within the existing channels of policy and traditional debate that are going on right now. The act of the 1AC is important, which is the framing argument that 1AR made, that the 2NR fundamentally conceded zero solvency for the pick, which means that it is a question of whether whether the 1AC was good or whether the affect was so bad that it's not worth considering. How should the judge decide this debate? The negative provides you with two contradictory modes of decision. First is that it's a dialectical method in which any consistency they point out is a reason to vote negative. This is a non-starter. They were inconsistent too. All this nonsense about conditionality and it's an internal critique versus an external critique are just more inconsistencies that are piling up. I think the way are pointing this out is probably independently good, which means that there's no reason to vote app or vote neg based off their sort of inconsistencies argument. So the second argument is who produces better affect. He has conceded the 1AR argument that affect is fundamentally indeterminate. I don't know how other people will take up things. You might think about nuclear war and feel sad instead of angry, or feel angry, or you might, if you're Callum, you might really like the idea of nuclear war. The entire point is that we don't know how people respond to things, which means that affect theory is fundamentally a non-starter for determining how political actions work. Instead, we should look at the gradual accretions of political subjectivity that are accumulated. That is our Gleasos and our Sherman evidence, and that's our access to solvency. It's the way that we constellate our subjectivity through a particular exchange of ideas and communicative practice, which I think is something they fundamentally conceded that is a better way of determining the political effect of the 1AC than affect, because affect, once again, is indeterminate. I think they've also conceded the Schatz evidence is better than they give it credit for. The only answer in the 2NR2 are only apocalyptic rhetoric's good card is not about deliberation. Neither is any single piece of evidence that the 1NC or 2NC has read, or the 1NR has read, which I think is pretty indicative. Our Schatz evidence is also incredibly good, probably because our boy Joe Schatz now he says that there's fundamentally no co-option. You can use the master's house to deconstruct master's tools to deconstruct the master's house. They have no piece of evidence which cuts back against this. He makes some argument about how they use the master's tools. I don't really know what this means in the context of apocalyptic rhetoric. And he also makes a decision rule argument that says that even if we might be co-opted by forces of biopolitical sovereignty, we should act anyway, because if we are right about the truth value of the 1AC, i.e. that extinction is coming now, that it is more important to present the 1AC rather than ignore it, which I think is a framing argument for how you should get the decision. They will try to suck up our offense. 1AC minus the apocalyptic rest. Once again, our performative solvency argument is important here. An important distinction. Also, their attempt to draw a line of competition between us in the form of will to authoritarianism that seeks to put everything in their box and determine an absolutely predictable 1AC for the 2NC to contest. I think this was independently impacted on the other critique in the 1AR, and they conceded, which means that their attempt to establish competition in the first place means they can't possibly solve. They have also conceded the Kennedy evidence, which says that we have to act in the face of extinction. We have to talk about extinction because there's no authentic being toward extinction or a way to imagine ourselves beyond it. The only way we can work through it authentically is by engaging with it and trying to work against it, which is an independent being in the world impact that they have conceded. All right. They make a bunch of slow violence arguments. We talk about slow violence. We talk about the labor without remuneration, the uprooted bodies. That is all of our Adams and our Hutchings evidence. We talk about the way that things become so-called laboratory animals or a terminal machine. These are all examples of ways in which people's individual lives are devalued through the process of technological globalization that we have identified. However, there's also no trade-off between slow violence and fast violence. Just because a gradual accretion of technological innovation leads to a fast violence that leads to an accident, so to speak, it doesn't mean that they approve that we have fundamentally devalued slow violence. Their turn space arguments are nonsensical. First is an assertion that we are not a revolutionary form of speed because we said uniqueness link impact. I don't know why that's not revolutionary. I don't know why revolutionaries can't use that language of logical argumentation. It's not against bottom-up stuff. It doesn't really make any sense. Their argument about how it shuts down deliberation because of apocalyptic affect creates a series of fear. Ignores the fact that affect is fundamentally indeterminate, which is a framing argument. Because if we win that affect is indeterminate, they have no DA to the 1AC. They also have no piece of evidence that actually supports this argument. We're the only ones reading a card on affect and apocalyptic rhetoric in this debate, which is shocking, but also fun, which is also true. The third is the judge's sovereignty argument. I don't think this was ever clearly explained throughout the entire debate. Our argument is not that the judge fundamentally gets to decide forever. The entire point is that you have to endorse our communicative intervention as a mode of constituting our political subjectivity in this space. As one space among others, you have to take a line of flight, so to speak, which I think is which I think is the opposite of saying that you should impose sovereign authority. They're the ones that ask you to impose a difference between the af and the neg, which is our competition solvency argument that they are talking about. They say, yeah, their method of critique is better. No, they said contradictions aren't bad because of conditionality. I don't even know what that means in this context. If we win that, I don't know, if they don't test it internally.
You have to understand the order.
Yeah, you have to understand the broader context of all these things. Reducing it to affect doesn't work.
I didn't know it. I used to even paper till now.